What's up, party people? It is me, your friend, and sometimes host, Ziggy Salvation. Today, hopefully, first of all, let's start with everyone I hope had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Much needed time with friends after the crazy year we've had with, between the pandemic, the election, not being able to see loved ones. Hopefully, not lost any loved ones, but just had a good week off of doing nothing. Yeah. That would be awesome. Hope everyone had a decent time. My apologies for taking the week off last week, but I figured it's the holidays. It's the one day where we actually had things planned with real people. As much as I love my friends here in the Pixel world, it's good to, take the wife and the kid and go see actual friends when the opportunity rises. That being said, with having the week off, I got to do a lot of thinking. I didn't really know where I wanted the show to go. So we've been talking a little bit about, first we started with the Covenants, and then we started doing lesser races. And I got to thinking, what's the one race we've all encountered since day one? And I've really always found a way in any expansion we go to. What have we encountered? So I told my wife I wanted to do a story, a chat about the Murlocs, and she whipped up this dude right here, hanging on my shoulder. So this is my IRL Murky for the afternoon, for the evening, should I say? What time is it? It's 9:17 at night. But yeah, man, a little bit about the Murlocs that everyone hears that one awesome sound that you really once you hear it, it's always in your head, right? It just you just remember it always, and it goes a little bit like this, right? So it can be anywhere, and okay, something's about to try to kill me. The thing about Murlocs is being bipedal, and they're amphibious, but they're kind of semi-intelligent, right? They're aggressive as hell, and they always reside along coastlines or riverbeds or places like that. So if you think about a Murloc, they have like this little light bulb shaped body where they taper at the butt. They get bigger at the head and chest. They're mostly eyes and teeth at the front, and they're usually either carrying a sword and shield, or they have a lightning shield on because they have shamanistic properties and faiths, or they have a harpoon that they're trying to jam into your chest cavity from 15 paces back. The individual's range of coloration is what really separates them, because they go from anywhere from a turquoise to like a darkish gray. Sometimes you see their heights vary from 3.5 foot to 6 foot tall. And depending on the variety, Murlocs can kind of lean towards a close resemblance to frogs or to a fish, right? The iconic green Murloc that we all know and collectively hate yet love at the same time, for example, has a coloration similar to the red-eyed green tree frog, right? So you can see where the inspiration comes from. So the Murlocs are relatively new historically. They mostly go to the Eastern Kingdoms. Yeah. It's kind of increasingly believed that they actually are more of the ancient races. And it seems like it's a recurring theme that a lot of races are here for a long time before we really get any sense of a good base of knowledge on them. They've been moving inland steadily from they dwell from the ocean side of things, and inhabiting more areas throughout Lordaeron. Okay, that's, and it could be a debate of their intelligence level. Is it something they meant to do? Some people argue that since they mostly have like this guttural language, little grunts and growls along the way, that it might not necessarily be, a high intelligence, but enough to get through of what they're trying to say to each other. So they do have somewhat a pack mentality. Additionally, if you guys remember back in Wrath of the Lich King, you go over to, not Howling Fjord, but you go to the other side. I always forget the name of it because it's been 15 years since I've been there, 10 years since I've been there. But data, right? It's that little coalition that makes you think they're there to reserve animals, but it's just another nesting wave tag to kill them all. The Winterfin tribe of Murlocs in the Borean Tundra. There we go, Borean Tundra. They are kind of as intelligent as some of Azeroth's more civilized races. They tend to dwell in like an amply populated coastal settlement, right? They have these little huts and they're stilted, and in these stilted little huts you get this atmosphere that they're kind of habitating. They're not just there wandering aimlessly, feeding off things right there in the water by the coastline that they're dwelling on, or things that wash up, right? So they kind of, they really don't wander too far from their fellow compatriots, because the second the threat gets too strong, you see them tucking tail, running back and calling for help. This is why it's such a big deal that we encounter them at such an early part of the game, because it's really the first mob most of us interact with that runs and gathers, aside from the gnolls. It's the first race. It's also usually aggressive. Creatures often lurk, out of sight. You see them hanging out underneath the water, and this tendency, kind of coupled along with their large social aggro radius, often leads to the larger pulls. Murlocs can organize into small tribes and even up to larger clans, and the clans can muster the tribes into like a fighting force when needed for an invasion. They can also join each other from larger forces. So like you'll often see different sections of, say, like the Winterfins or the ones out in Stranglethorn. Essentially, you can see them coming together to overcome a bigger obstacle, right? Hunting Murlocs can also be profitable. Given that the Murloc fins are an essential ingredient into a lot of common broth, and slimy Murloc scales are often in demand with expert leatherworkers for their crafting their finer armors, right? Because then Murlocs can also carry clams consistent with their level, as do most of the aquatic creatures in the game that may have certain various grades of clam meat and pearls, and it's possible that all Murlocs use clams as currency. Kind of like the Flintstones, funny enough. Winterfin Murlocs do for sure, right? We know that, it's in the game. There's also a hefty bounty because of their tendencies to terrorize coastal commerce and fishing locations. They're known to terrorize local fishermen. As far as the history of them, there's actually a Murloc history, and it's kind of largely unknown since most of their lore consists of their own oral tradition, which is a lot of the weird guttural grunt sounds and clicks and everything else, but it is their own language, right? Murlocs speak what's called Nurglish. It's a language that you also hear by the Makrura, which are the let's call them lobster people. If you're a horde, you commonly see them at the coast of Senjin Village in the Echo Isles, for example. I wouldn't exactly know where to quote that you find them as Alliance, just because, well, I don't care. Much of what is known about Murloc history is readily available and observable by almost any traveler, right? As noted earlier, Murlocs tend to congregate on shorelines, and there's these really heavily populated, almost encampments, and I call them villages, right? They are kind of known in certain cases to worship these enigmatic sea deities, if you will. Kind of like they worship the Naga, most common example. Importantly, though, the majority of Murloc tribes seem to harbor very little tolerance of most other sentient races, which is why they're so aggressive. That's one of my favorite aspects about them. They're just like these tiny, fierce, ready to go at any moment kind of little survivors. So, now that I think about the Alliance side, I think the first time I ever saw one was over in Aberdeen, right, in Darkshore, when I had a Night Elf. I felt bad for saying I didn't care. I do care about the Alliance, just on a very minimal level. It's not my fault, man. I got Horde stuff all around me. I've been Horde since before the game had a title, okay? It's not my problem. and so being that said, like the Night Elves on Kalimdor for some time, right? Murlocs are relatively new to the eastern continents of Lordaeron and Azeroth, but it's purported that Murlocs are actually a very old race, at least as old as the first Naga, right? So since the serpentine creatures are known for having slaving a group of deep sea dwelling Murlocs, we know them as the Murgle. Those are the guys that you hear grunting and kind of, you know, have the stalk with the little lure on their head. So in more recent times, though, the Murlocs became unwittingly, responsible for the shape of the present-day Horde. Because Murloc attacks on the Trollish Darkspear tribe kind of spurred the Orcish war chief that I know and love so much, Thrall. At the time, he kind of waylaid on the Darkspear Islands, right, and his warriors to drive off this marauding fishmen, and then to form an alliance between Darkspear and the Horde, which lasts still to this day. So the Troll-Orc alliance would form, you know, the heart of the modern day Horde, which is the Torn and the Forsaken, the Blood Elves, and, you know, the Blood Elves later joined, of course. So even in the early days, you know, when everything was first coming together, Murlocs, though hated, again, were responsible for much. Culture-wise, when faced with products such as, you know, anything technological or superior culture, right, the Black Slit displayed none of the curiosity characteristic for emerging cultures in a humanoid species. And that's coming straight from the Explorers League, right? It comes right from Clopper Whizbang, from observing them. But it's funny because for someone who's not that, you know, not that intelligent race-wise, they do have a faith structure. It's an older, more fish-like Murloc model. Murloc faith is strange though, right? Some accounts kind of report that religion plays a dominant role in their society, though they don't really revere a single, like, entity, at least to our knowledge, at least anything that's been presented. The religion is polytheistic, it's animistic, it's even a bit of shamanistic, because we see those with the lightning shields or the water shields around them. They have rituals involving communication with the sea and its power, and they do worship the water as a power, you know, as a power entity, that there's something that resides in it. So that's kind of something to be said in itself. Exactly. Murlocs believe, you know, they also incorporate powerful creatures that kind of live around them. And they have pantheons they're very dynamic. Changing, you know, to include newer creatures they encounter, they may add or remove creatures that they've worshipped structured to reflect recent events. So that it's always, the ties of it are always kind of changing. There's a tribe that might venerate a whale, or even raise its status to a whale god, until a giant sea serpent drives it away. At which point they'd probably start believing a little bit higher in the serpent, because it chased what they thought was the powerful chief object to the reverence, and kind of was taken out by something else. Another tribe might worship the Naga Sea Witch until, say, she's killed by sharks. At that point, it would be replaced by sharks. And that's where you can sort of see the intellect side of things, of them being so not that smart, because it's just that simple, taking one side or the other. Now, if a nearby example, you know, a nearby creature kind of sets a Murloc values, such as a strong shark or a quick fish, becoming a living symbol of the Murloc faith. And as animals die and move on, Murloc faith kind of mutates to find new symbolism in their surroundings, which is kind of, you know, it's not that unbelievable, as far as we see the same sort of thing in human culture. As times change, different things are kind of believed and perceived, and then we kind of get away. At least the majority of people I've unfortunately encountered in today's world are starting to leave the older, legit structured beliefs to kind of go with what's coming forward, right? Or what's coming into our lives as we know it. Some are known, you know, Murloc, some of them are known to really, back to the religion, to revere a deep mother, right? which is a representation of the ocean, or all the things that the water, inside of it that habitate inside the water are her children. The Murlocs haven't really been observed, they haven't been observed to unite behind a single deity. Some rumors claim that all Murlocs revere an entity called the One in the Deeps. However, that's kind of unclear whether this is also representation of the ocean or if it's even an entity at all. Kind of another example it makes me think of is when, the Rockpool tribe. Yeah, they worship Neptulon, the Tide Hunter. If you go back to the village aspect of it, right? Murlocs consists, of these little villages that are kind of a rough mud and twig huts, kind of strewn about. They're not really, there's no really, no planned out pattern of how they're laid out. These villages typically also have no fire, no clear walkways, there's no fortifications, there's nothing to say, this is stay out sort of thing. They're crude, they're relatively plain, and the settlement is otherwise featureless except for the shallow basin you normally see behind the shaman's hut, if there is one. Most huts stand on stilts to protect them from tides, rain, and flooding, so they're obviously smart enough to understand tides and washing away of the houses and the village in itself. In a sharp contrast to their primitive exterior, the interior walls of most Murloc huts are often elaborately decorated. Some depict, branching coral, where others kind of contain mosaics of shell and stone, and yet others possess surprisingly delicate tapestries of shaded seaweed, of all things. The huts are usually open to the air, with a small wooden pillar to hold the roof up. Murlocs sleep in the water or on the woven mat of seaweed, tied firmly enough to hold their shape, but still loose enough to look like a small rectangular net. And then they have little hooks of coral to hold weapons and other items on their walls or their pillars. So there's definitely an organization about them. It kind of reminds you, if anybody's ever owned a ferret, the same sort of thing. They seem chaotic, they seem crazy, they seem ferocious, but they also, they don't shit where they eat, if you will. Pardon my language. The funny thing about Murlocs too is there's an artisan fact, little point to them. They rarely work in metal, and they almost never touch fire. But they're expert carvers. They can work with stone, shell, coral, wood, and they can manipulate these things into fabulous shapes, and these amazing scenes and designs. And there's a perfect example. There's a lifelike piranha carved into a short piece of coral, right? Shaman staffs are also their works of art. They kind of carved them to hold bone and shell chips, as well as teeth, flippers, or claws of various sea creatures not seen by most people that live on the land side of life. The blacksmith Murlocs over in Bloodmist Isles, they're also known for their stone-carved idols, which is really the only time you see such extensive work. Murlocs, at the same time though, with collecting all of these things, they don't trade these items. They typically only trade shells and seaweed and other raw materials. Just like the Winterfin Murlocs, for example, they trade unopened clams, right? It's claimed also that they sometimes award traders with their artwork after particularly good trades, and I find that absolutely comical. Can you imagine just getting, a little, like, for example, if a little tiny Murloc traded you a thing and was so happy about it, he gave you this carved little shell and then proceeded to do a dance. You never know, man, little things like that. So knowing that they trade, knowing that they collect, knowing that they carve, knowing that they have organization and delicate tapestries, for small examples, must mean they have a language. We didn't really talk about it, but it is a dialect of Nurglish, which is the Murloc dialect. And don't usually, they're not really known for knowing other languages. However, some do learn other languages in order to trade shells and seaweed and other raw materials with other races. They can speak Common in some cases, but I'm sure it's heavily impacted with a Nurglish twang to it. A lot of them have inherited the Nurglish base language from the Naga and other fish races. So with that being said, when you come across one, you don't really think too much of it until you fight them, because believe it or not, they have tactic, man. They're pack fighters. They prefer to think of the fish mentality and swarm an opposing force with an overwhelming number. And then when they're pressed, the pack kind of breaks and Murlocs run back to the safety of the water, often leaving their allies behind. So they're not exactly courageous, but sometimes cowardly. But it's also the whole fact of they are survivors, which is why their eyes are on the sides of their head. Typical anatomy of an animal that is highly about fight or flight. And those who pursue Murlocs in the water are usually crushed without mercy. That's their place. They can go faster, hit harder. That is their domain, right? So despite their monstrous appearances and weak little bodies, Murlocs are these cunning little foes with these super sharp senses and even sharper reflexes, because if they can lead you to the water. Naturally, Murlocs are incredible, warriors underwater, which isn't too hard to even fathom because of how they're built. It's just they are aquatic. They're amphibious. It is what it is. But they retreat to the water to draw enemy forces, thinking that they're pushing them. Their numbers are hidden. Murlocs can wait in water. Yeah. So with that, they have their feet, they have their teeth, they have their claws, and they have, these aquatic skills and numbers to decimate most, if not any, enemy force. And then when they engage in battle underwater, they attack from all directions. They use the numbers like piranhas, right? They dart out of the swarm and attack quickly. They retreat back for the safety of the swarm. And even trivial wounds are considered in their world great hits. As a bit more of the swarm attacked, the weaker the enemy becomes. Furthermore, the swarm, they don't really let the victim escape. And the strongest combatants usually die of drowning or blood loss while engaging underwater with a Murloc army. On land, however, Murlocs are not nearly as dangerous, right? Despite their agility, most Murlocs are slow and clumsy on land. They're not really built for gravity. Even if they're equipped with harpoons or whatever, they're still ill-equipped for the rigors of the dry world. And Murloc forces really are known to move far inland. They like to keep close to the water for that very reason. Unless there's, large bodies of water nearby where they're settling. They prefer to stay near the safety of water. But when forced to battle on land, Murlocs kind of employ a similar hit-and-run tactic, attempting to weaken the foe a lot. Pick away at them, kill them with paper cuts before they go in for the final kill. Another funny thing is they're one of the few races that throughout the adventuring, they've also been found undead. They've been summoned back to life. According to who was it? One of the apothecaries, I think it's Renzathan. Murlocs retain their free will and undeath. Though it's really unclear if this is caused by natural resistance or the will of, they can kind of resist the will of the Lich King. But for undead Murlocs, unlike the Forsaken, they broke away at some point from the Greater Scourge. Despite this, the Scourge was able to bolster their ranks with their Murgul. Those are that's what they call the undead Murlocs. Murloc territories and villages, in-game, you'll see them in Northrend. You'll see them down in Westfall, Stranglethorn Vale. There's actually a landlocked big purple version of Murlocs. There's a little dip in the Cape of Stranglethorn. Northern Stranglethorn Vale, I'm sorry. Just below, kind of in the middle, kind of northeast of Gromgol. So in recent times, right, you got the Murlocs that have spread to so many regions in both the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. And on Kalimdor, most commonly found inhabiting the inland lakes and the eastern shores, though there's a few tribes that do prowl along beaches between Teldrassil and Darkshore. Also, possibly the highest level Murlocs that live on the coast of the northern part of Vishara. In the Eastern Kingdoms, on the other hand, Murlocs can be found terrorizing almost every coastal shore and inland body of water. Where in Northrend, the Wooden-Fin Murlocs tolerate the presence of most outsiders, even their trust must be earned before one's actually truly accepted. So with Murloc subraces, you have the Gorloks, which you'll see in Shalazar Basin. You see the Murghol, which we just covered, which is the undead Murlocs. The Murghol themselves, the mutant Murloc, like the last boss, Mutanus, at the end of Wailing Caverns. The deep sea Murlocs with the lure attached to their head. I'd say, the most sentient one, right? That's a relative that we don't really think about is the Jinyu. We know them from Pandaland, the tall 6-foot ninja fish people. Definitely related. You can see how that kind of fits together because of the harpoons and the staves. But that being said, though, Murlocs still have a presence in the game today. You have a chef on the Van Cleave ship, Cookie, or you got Old Murkai, he's at the end of the quest in Westfall for the Coastal Menace. Then there's, over in Bluegill Marsh in the wetlands, you got Gobbler. But Mutanus the Devourer, he's the giant, right? He's the end boss that I was talking about. He can be fought after defeating these 4 huge Fang Lords, and then starting this event from an NPC you meet in Wailing Caverns. Even though Murloc, history is shrouded in this complete mystery, it's due not only to the fact that these creatures appeared on Azeroth shores fairly recently, at least as far as world history goes, but also because Murlocs shun mortals, and rarely, if ever, speak anything but their own natural, garbled, clicky language. What's been known up until now about these little fishmen is the following, right? The basic synopsis of it. They're not the most intelligent creatures. They congregate in shorelines and villages, and they have their little huts. They've been known in certain instances to worship like these enigmatic sea creatures, and they seem to care very little for most of the other mortal races. They kind of select individuals who manage to gather information, either by spying or torturing or superstitiously gaining the Murloc's trust, but bringing some interesting details to light. First of all, Murlocs, they might not be as dumb as everyone thinks, because several clues point to the fact that their steady infiltration of the world's land masses may be a coordinated effort, because they're literally everywhere, but yet they're so small you wouldn't really take much notice to it, because they're kind of seen as insignificant and not really that threatening because they stay on those coastlines. But who's not to say they're not going to move in? The Murloc race might be far older than most believe, because several accounts of clues seem to substantiate this. It's now believed, as of more recently, that Murlocs, or more appropriately, I guess their ancestors, may predate trolls, which is eons ago. These ancient Murlocs lived in the oceans way, way, way deep. Therefore, we really never knew about the world's early land-dwelling races. So that is neither here nor there, but that is kind of where we think they're coming from. In the last few years, the Naga have begun kind of re-emerging from their watery abodes, causing these historians to speculate that the migration might have triggered the Murloc's slow encroachment onto land. And some of them also guess that Murlocs might be kind of working in concert with the crazy ass Nagas. Not really the farthest thing that you can really think of, knowing that they kind of see them as a religious leader sometimes, Several indicators from the Murlocs themselves point to the possibility that fishmen, are kind of worshippers and underlings of perhaps several deep sea monsters. And they currently lie sleeping, or at least waiting in murky fathoms. So there's plenty of speculation that Murlocs are still worshipping something that we've even yet to encounter. And if that's the case, this mysterious and somewhat underestimated, as much as the Murlocs might be, could be the world's first glimpse into something far more terrifying. Funny thing to me, and I'll play it at the play out, is the Murlocs are so well known. If you guys remember the band that started in World of Warcraft back in BC, level 70 Elite Tauren Chieftain, and they've kind of adapted that band name every expansion. Now there's, we even know them as a figurehead in Heroes of the Storm, is just ETC. They even wrote a song called I Am Murloc, because these little creatures kind of get under everyone's skin, but have kind of also become the unofficial logo, an unofficial mascot for WoW. There's a lot of people that have seen a Murloc or, can identify it, not necessarily know what it's referenced, but it's just gotten that big. Jinx, as far as the company that makes the gaming clothing for many franchises, they even have a plush Murloc that you can buy, and you can have it in your house in a week. On the other hand, there's a group of fans that wishes nothing more than to see Murlocs exterminated from the entirety of the face of Azeroth. These players kind of tend to be Alliance, as it is the Alliance that runs in them far more often than not. Me personally, I have fond memories of both hilarity and just bitter hatred for these little buggers, but I never want to see them go away. They're too tiny and mighty for that. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. Drop a comment, drop a like, share it. This video, I'll have a version up on the good old-fashioned YouTube tomorrow. You can check out all the socials. We got it is Baron's Podcast on Twitter, Baron's Chat Podcast on Instagram. You can just search the channel, search the name on YouTube. Again, anyone willing to take a minute, you can send an email or drop a comment of what you want to hear next. The email is, of course, thebaronschatpodcast@gmail.com. Again, I am Ziggy Salvation. I appreciate everyone kind of hanging out, coming in late for all of you that are here. Hope you learned a little bit. Hope you laughed a little bit. And I hope you think a little bit about the next time you see a Murloc that maybe the thing you're mercilessly just destroying kind of deserves it. Because given the chance, yeah, he'll cut you first. But yeah, I will see you guys next week. We will be back on a regular schedule. I've been doing Thursdays the last, obviously today and the week before last, but work has been having me there more, but it looks as though it's starting to slow down again. So therefore, if I'm able to do Wednesdays, I'd really like to get back to doing the Wednesday stream. And it seems to be that the evenings are working out. So until then, I will see you next week. I am going to play the level 70 Elite Tauren Chieftain rendition of I Am Murloc, and then we are gonna go jump into another stream. So I will see you guys soon. I hope everyone has a phenomenal day, and yeah, hope everyone has a good night. Take care.